Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And I'm Danielle Christina. And, well, we're going very soon, as we've mentioned sort of in the past, to Politicon in Nashville, October 26th weekend. If you want to see us live on stage, I'm trying to get Christina enough wine into her that she'll break out into country music on the stage.
I'm going to the Grand Ole Opry. It's my chance. Just go and make a recording in one of those little studios and then get a DJ to play
Should we do it? Do they have those, like, recording booths where you can... okay. We're going to torture our listeners and do that. I have an inner Patsy Cline that...
just waiting to break out.
I
saw that inner Patsy Cline one night after the party was over, and you had your karaoke.
We had a karaoke night in my house. It was so much fun.
I think our listeners are cringing at the idea of the Femsplainer karaoke, but Femsplainer karaoke, and we might do it in Nashville.
Yeah, so beware. And our guest there is going to be E. Jean Carroll, who has written a book called Why Do We Need Men? And she also writes this famous advice column for Elle magazine. But she also claims to have been raped or violated by President Trump in a lingerie changing room at Bergdorf Goodman. So we might, ask her about that.
Certainly want to know about that. And she's just a fascinating character.
She lives in like a polka dot house in the woods, and she drives a polka dot Prius or something. She sounds like our kind of woman.
Yeah.
Even if we disagree with her, she sounds very eccentric.
Very eccentric, but very interesting.
And so today we're also going to have, today on the podcast, we talked about it a little bit with Caitlin Flanagan, who got the fallout from this article that Emily Yoffe wrote called Radioactive, about the case of Jonathan Kaman, who worked for the China Bureau at the
LA Times
and got accused, not even by underlings or people who reported
friends,
sort of like ex hookups with whom he was friends, kind of in that expat world of journalists. And 5 years later, he was fired by the LA Times. He lost a book deal. He's now living with his parents in Minnesota, I think.
And if you read the accounts, I know a lot of people think, oh, well, he must have done something. If you read the accounts that both parties agree to in both of these young women's cases, it was just a bad date. It was like an Aziz Ansari kind of hookup that went bad. And he's lost his career. He's suffered like psychological annihilation.
So Emily's going to be on. Emily, of course, she's been on before. We love Emily. She's contributor to The Atlantic. This article actually appeared in Reason magazine. And we're going to talk about that. Start by talking about that because she got a lot of flack. And then Caitlin Flanagan tweeted the article, and then she got flack, and we talked about that. So it's everybody is radioactive, I think, when you talk about any of these topics. Men who may have gotten not a great deal or may have been wrongly accused. You get, as Emily did, you get accused of not supporting MeToo. You get accused of
being a backlasher, being a rape culture denialist, and not believing women.
But
maybe we should, listen to women, but to believe women automatically, that would be the end of the presumption of innocence for men. So all you have to do is accuse a man, and he's guilty because accused.
Right. And
that's where we are in some cases.
I think it's interesting, I guess, 2 years on from Me Too, we're kind of at a stage of reckoning for where it's going, that having been this kind of movement that began with bringing down people like Harvey Weinstein.
And began for good reason.
And great reasons, and continues. There continues to be good reasons.
Yeah.
But we have to now look at some of the fallout, and I can't think of anyone better to do that with than with Emily. But before we do, we have our little topics of the week.
I'm boycotting one of the topics. I'm just going to say that right now.
Okay. I'm not bringing that up first.
Okay.
I'm not bringing up that first because we may start a new segment called News for Mansplainers, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. This is from a survey the Journal of Marriage and Family that reveals there is a significant scarcity of potential male mates for unmarried women. Basically, there's a man shortage in the U.S. market. And I'm just going to cite the study. It says, one explanation for declines in marriage is a shortage of economically attractive men for unmarried women to marry.
Well, women don't tend not to want to marry men who have less education than they do. You tend to want to marry someone with the same or more education. Men don't care about that as much. So there is this shortage, a dearth of men that women want to marry. But I warned about this a long time ago. We have neglected the education of young men. And when you bring it up, that young men are falling behind, that they're not going to college at the same rate as women, that they're being neglected educationally, that our schools do a better job educating girls than boys. When you bring that up, people accuse you of, that's a backlash against women. No, you know what is a backlash, or at least harmful to women, is not to have marriageable young men. And we've brought this on ourselves. They've been neglected educationally. And then now, do you know that we've got, there's a trend now, and this has been documented by my AEI colleague, Nick Eberstadt, that about 10 million men in prime working years, that is between 25 and 54, they are out of the labor force entirely. It's not just that they're unemployed or they're temporarily out of work. They've dropped out.
Is this because of addiction, possibly, as well?
No, they've just given up. And they just kind of get along, and a lot of young
living in there,
maybe with their parents, or maybe crashing with friends, or it could just be, this goes up to age 54, so it'd be a middle-aged man that lost his job, depressed, and just staying in the at home, and the wife is working. But nevertheless, with younger men, they say now that there was a time where you could graduate from high school and then get a job and work very hard, and you could make it into the middle class and support a family. But that's just not true anymore. You have to have education beyond high school. That's the new passport.
Is it education, or because one of the things it says is, this may, as we always discover that the elites are fine, but according to this study that men with stable job and a good income are difficult to find, especially in the current gig economy of unstable, low-paying service jobs. It's also the change of our economy.
Right.
Education or training to do different types of jobs that aren't necessarily, like mining. One of the biggest jobs I understand for men in this category is truck driving. And a lot of these jobs are vanishing. For women, too, for working class women as well.
Well, this is one reason I think people should just take a listen to Andrew Yang. He's the one candidate who's actually looking ahead and seeing that the problems for unemployed or unemployable men and many women, it's not that foreigners are taking our jobs, anything like that. It's automation. Mm-hmm. And so he's looking ahead, and he has proposed a guaranteed income. And people say, that's so radical. It's not as radical as people think. It's not the worst thing in the world that you would give people a guaranteed income so they could survive, and then they could figure out what they can do.
But isn't the real problem is finding and adapting to a changing workplace?
The thing about Yang is that he's very rational and reasonable. You can change his mind. So if you pointed out problems, he'd come up with something else. But at least he's just not mouthing the usual platitudes. And I'm tired of it. And he's kind of a futurist. And I think he's exciting. People should listen to him.
But to go back to your original point about educating men.
But it's still important to educate.
And I think more your point is also, if I may say, is to recognize that men have different, and male students have different challenges, that schools aren't catering necessarily to. They're being labeled troubled or problematic.
As someone said, schools are run by women for girls.
Yeah.
And boys are there on sufferance. And the gold standard, that's the girl. And boys are being judged as sort of, they're failing to be good girls. Well, there must have been a time where, I'm sure, where teachers understood that educating a little boy, especially a very young boy, is more of a challenge. And there are some girls that fit in that category too, that aren't, that are very just obstreperous and don't want to be there. They feel like caged animals. And we medicate too much, and we're cutting back on recess. And I think as the classrooms become just more risk-averse, competition-averse, feeling-centered, they're moving away from the needs of boys.
Well, as we talked about with Candace Bushnell a couple weeks ago, Sex and the City, she revealed a potential employment strategy for young men. I mean, sorry, guys, you'd have to be pretty good-looking, but to go find older women and move into their houses, older divorced women, cubbing their cubs. Middle-aged women are into it, apparently.
Well,
maybe they could form a union. Well, speaking of men, I want to open up maybe our first news for mansplainers, news you can use. Because I came across a story, and Ella Ryder, who's
Hello.
here with us in the studio, had bullied Christina into letting us use this story.
I just wanted to be known for our listeners, and back me up on this. We should not be talking about this. Okay, go ahead. La 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 la.
What I would call toxic femininity meets toxic masculinity. So I'll just.
This is just.
And this is
can you
not
give
from
a
the
trigger
Daily
warning?
Mail.
Can you give a
This is
trigger
not
warning?
from the Daily
This
Mail.
is a Lorena Bobbitt trigger warning.
Washington Post story. It says, police say a woman cut off her husband's penis. His wife told, it says, just before 4 a.m. Tuesday, this was in North Carolina, deputies arrived at the Newport home of Victoria Thomas Frabbit. Her husband, James, reported that his wife had tied him up, pulled out a knife, and removed his penis. And his wife told a 911 operator that she used a pruner good for pruning roses, and that James' bleeding wasn't enough to create the sign of the cross to write sinner.
Oh, my
she
God.
planned to do. Because why did she cut off his penis, Ella?
Well, apparently it was part of the message against sinning against God and fornication.
So,
Fornication?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That changes everything.
So we don't know whether he was like sinning in an adulterous way. Maybe he just wasn't godly enough. Maybe she just bugged him and he had become toxic. But either ways, here is the good news, and this is what you can use, men. If you wake up and your wife is there with her rose pruning shears and she's going to tie you up.
Oh, God.
Get out.
He's not
You
the toxic
can
one.
reattach it with
Oy.
success.
Really?
It says,
Well, you can do that with fingers.
well, yeah. So apparently a penis is like a finger. It says if someone's penis is removed in a non-medical environment, timing is critical. It says the sooner you get it back on and reestablish blood supply, the better. And they think the maximum amount of time it can be cut off is between actually 6 and 12 hours. But what do you do? Tell the men what they do if
Oh, God.
this happens
Please.
to them.
This is not.
Oh, there was it was salt water, right?
Yeah, it says to wrap the organ in salt water soaked gauze, noting that saline keeps the tissue moist while the ice cools.
Okay, I'm going to point something out. I'm going to point
And
something.
slows the process.
And I just want to point out a disparity. Imagine if
don't know why I'm
a man had cut off a woman's breast, and then we were just talking about it. It's so funny, and girls just put it in salt water,
Yeah, you're right.
right?
You're right. But you know what? They do that, and we get very upset. Not breasts, but other parts of women in the name of
Well, that's a ritual.
a ritual in the
But we don't make fun of it. We don't make fun of it. But
right.
But I think.
Well, this isn't going on ritualistically. I mean, I don't think yet women across
No. The thing is,
country
it's
are cutting
a
men's penises
frightening,
off.
heinous crime, but it's treated a bit humorlessly because it's happening to men. And this
I
is
mean,
what
humorously,
what did I say?
humorlessly.
Oh, humorously, because it's men.
I didn't know. Okay, but I didn't know this, and this is good news that you can rescue it. you can reattach it. And even if you don't, it says, I'm sorry, this is very serious. A stump would still allow for a man to use the restroom because there's still the capability of dispelling urine through the urethra opening. So if you find yourself with a toxic feminist castrator, you're still going to be okay. This time is of the essence, gentlemen.
Okay. Moving on.
I have one more. I can't really justify this under a femsplainer rubric.
But you know what? It's the mother in us. I want young men. I want everyone to know this.
Okay, actually, I'll read it.
You read it because
you comment.
Yeah.
This is a boy who is a picky eater, and only ate junk food, led to blindness. Again, this is from CNN Health, not the Daily News.
And was he also masturbating? I'm serious.
This is not funny, Christina. You are not taking male health issues
I am, but enough. I don't think, junk food, okay. There's protein in junk food.
He said eating a diet of French fries, Pringles, and white bread.
Oh, that was it?
Was enough to make one teenage boy lose his sight, according to a medical journal. He wasn't taking any medication, had a normal BMI and height, showed no visible signs of malnutrition, and he started to lose his hearing. He started to lose his vision, and of course, doctors were baffled.
Didn't he feel bad?
Yeah, well, I guess he's.
And didn't his parents notice?
They're going to the doctors, but they're trying to figure out what's going on. And
did his parents know that's all he ate?
Well, I guess so. Well,
that's about all I ate, to be honest.
My son has a very funny story about one of his college friends who was feeling very sick and went to the doctor. And the doctor did tests, left the room, came back, and said, "What are you, a fucking pirate?" And the boy said, "Why? What?" He said, "You have scurvy."
He had scurvy?
He had scurvy because this guy, he existed on, pizza and French fries and stuff.
Pizza.
And the boy said, "Well, what do I do?" He goes, "Eat a fucking orange." So watch your diet, young men. And that's our health news for the week for our mansplaining listeners. And now I think we should bring on Emily and now talk about radioactive men. Christina, I think you knew at one point I tried to run an online business. And one of the things that defeated me was having to keep track of all the finances. It was a nightmare. But there's now NetSuite, which keeps everything together and helps you really organize your business systems.
Because if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business.
But the problem that growing businesses have, and especially if you're like me, I was a startup, so you're doing it all on your own, is these hodgepodge of business systems. With NetSuite by Oracle, it's a business management software that handles every aspect of your business in an easy-to-use cloud platform, giving you the visibility and control you need to grow.
And with NetSuite, you save money, time, unheeded headaches.
Yes.
You can avoid those by managing sales, finance, accounting, orders, and HR instantly right from your desktop or phone.
And that's why NetSuite is the world's #1 cloud business system.
And right now, NetSuite is offering you valuable insights with a free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits at netsuite.com/femsplain.
That's netsuite.com/femsplain to download your free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits.
netsuite.com/femsplain. Emily Yoffe, welcome to the Femsplainers.
So great to be back. Thank you.
Back to the Femsplainers, one of our favorite Femsplainers.
Yes. And we want to talk about your fantastic story in Reason Magazine, and it's the talk of it was the talk of the town, and it still has ramifications about this young man, Jonathan Kaman. He's probably, as you say, the least famous, least powerful man to be brought down by the MeToo movement.
One of them. There's some spirit people, yes.
So just tell us a little about him and what happened.
John Kaman he's 32, so he was the young Beijing bureau chief of the Los Angeles Times. He worked his way up through journalism. He's an American, had a Fulbright, went to China, learned Mandarin, stayed, and became a journalist. This was about a year ago. He had just sold a book for a substantial advance to Random House about a little-known part of World War II, an American pilot who'd been captured.
Right.
So his career was booming, and everything ended. His career has been utterly destroyed. There's no book. He's fired. It's hard to imagine he'll work in journalism again by MeToo, and it began with an accusation on Medium by a woman who'd been a friend of his who 5 years earlier, they'd been longtime expat friends. They were at a kind of alcohol-fueled party, and they were flirting and drinking. She drove him back on her scooter to his apartment. This is all her own account. They were kind of amused, as she said, to find themselves naked in bed and starting to have sex. And at one point she realized, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I don't want to do it. Stood up, got out of bed, said, I don't really want to do it. Again, this is her description. She says he stayed where he was, pouted and whined. As I spoke to him, he said he was taken aback by this very sudden change of heart, and he kind of was trying to jolly her back to their previous mood. He saw that wasn't working, and he said, I sat up to start getting dressed to go. Clearly the evening was ending. At that point, as she describes, she says, I decided to do the thing so many women do. I put male pleasure ahead of my own, and I got back in bed with him, and they had sex, which she describes as making her feel gross. Afterwards, she said she was mad at herself and him. They talked it out. He thought he apologized. She thought he didn't sufficiently apologize. And that was that until Me Too. And she said, as people were going through this, saying Me Too,
right,
she realized, I have a Me Too story. And she said, I want to add my voice to this. And she published this account. He had no warning. And
Where did she publish it again?
Medium.
Yeah.
So self-published. Mm-hmm. And that began the unraveling of his career.
So anybody can self-publish a story. They can take a hookup that went badly. It just sounded like a bad night. But she's construing it because she felt like he was moping, and she felt manipulated by that.
Well, it's funny. One of the things she objects to is that when she stands up to say, I don't want to go ahead with this, she says he wouldn't get out of my bed. In his head, and this is what's so you rarely get both inside the head of both people. So she's thinking, what's he doing? He's staying in my bed. And he's thinking, I don't want to stand up and go toward her or try to touch her. She's has a change of heart. I'm going to stay where I am and not make any move toward her. So they're each misinterpreting each other. But even by her own account, it's just a misunderstanding.
Miscommunication.
An unfortunate event. It is not a sexual assault. And she said at the time she was mad at him and mad at herself. And one of the things she said in coming out and reporting this is that she realized it's not her fault. Everything that happened was John's fault.
Right.
Oh,
so there was no responsibility in her part that she actually got back into the bed, and clearly he wasn't threatening her. And there was no, as you say, there was no, by any legal standard, anything unlawful. But then, so she publishes this in Medium. He's blindsided. And I guess Medium, they don't have libel issues. They don't have journalistic standards that require you to get comment from the person you're writing about. Is that?
She's writing her story.
Okay. So tell us then what happened next.
So he's completely blindsided by this. This was 5 years earlier. And she also not only put it on Medium, she joined Twitter. To date, she has 2 tweets, and they're both about her Medium post, and that is her entire Twitter activity. So it went out on Twitter, and he's suddenly getting inundated with, what have you done? You're one of these MeToo men. Yep. And he tweets an abject apology saying, I'm so sorry if I upset you. I thought we had everything was okay, that we talked it out, and if I'm just stunned to hear that you feel this way.
Because that never even happened. That conversation did not happen even at the time.
It did happen at the time. She said after they had sex, she was stewing about it and just feeling bad about it, and let him know. Mm-hmm. And he was immediately apologetic and said, well, let's get together and talk it out. And he, was like, I'm sorry if you feel this way. You got back into bed, so I thought it was okay. We were in agreement. And he thought, okay, they're friends. There's an electronic trail of texts with her initiating get-togethers with him afterward that, I saw. But she says, actually, their friendship was never back on track, and she was just, trying to avoid him, but not make a scene.
And then, so that comes out. What does the LA Times do? He was also, if I recall from your story, head of the local, press association.
Popular. He was popular.
Yes,
he was well liked.
He was elected. So in 2017, president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of China. Mm-hmm. And this is a journalist organization. They have various goals to protect journalists, especially, because John himself was detained by the Chinese government several times for reporting on human rights abuses. It can be dangerous to be a journalist.
This is worse than anything the Chinese authorities ever did to.
Oh, yeah.
There's irony in that.
Right.
Sadly.
So it's a journalism organization, and it's also a very social organization. A lot of what they do is just social events for expats in China. So he was president of the Foreign Correspondents Club. There was a board meeting scheduled at the time this accusation broke. And all of a sudden, the agenda is changed. We've got to talk about the president of our club and this accusation against him. Now I have to digress, because after this first accusation came out, he got a text from another woman who'd been also a friend of his, who several months earlier, probably 6 months or more earlier, they'd known each other for years. They had, after a long party drinking day, they had a sexual encounter, which both agreed was a mistake. John, was cheating on his girlfriend. It was just not a good idea. It was at 2 a.m. at the end of
another alcohol fueled.
Yeah,
we should just get that on a bumper.
Alcohol fueled, but they were both clear from their accounts, walking, talking, making decisions.
But this has gone on in the expat community.
Never.
I mean, never. There was wild sex and wanton sex. And
maybe in human history, people have
hooked up,
had drinks, and then had sex. I don't know. I've heard that's happened.
That they weren't so pleased about.
So this was much more clearly a regretted encounter on everyone's part. John, at the end of it, felt very guilty. It's after 2 a.m, the woman who's now a reporter at the Washington Post, at the end of it, he said, I think you should go. He didn't check. Did she get home all right? I mean, it was just, that was bad. They also had a conversation afterward about it where they both agreed it was a mistake. She had, like the first accuser, driven him to the apartment on her scooter. So she apologized for driving while drinking, and, he apologized.
Which is a punishable crime. Can we just say
Yes,
that?
but they're in China, so who knows what they're...
Yeah, actually, there's a lot more.
Women with scooters, maybe just be careful, men.
And so they had mutually kind of apologized to each other, but the friendship kind of foundered. She contacted him that day, and he initially saw that she was texting him and thought,
this is after the medium piece.
After the medium piece, he thought, she's getting in touch to offer me some advice on this terrible thing.
Just friendship.
Yeah, she was texting him to say, this medium accusation has prompted me to rethink our encounter, and it's taken me a lot of time, and I've thought about it a lot, but I think what happened between us was not okay, and you were too forceful. So now he immediately gets in touch with her, and he again is just completely blindsided, and he said,
he must be terrified at that point.
Absolutely, abjectly terrified, crying, and people are like, well, you should be crying if you have violated 2 women. But as I describe, the first encounter is just not reading her words of violation. The second one, is if we talk about it more, has elements that maybe, but elements that are clearly consensual. So he's completely blindsided. They have a conversation, which is very inconclusive. He doesn't know what she's planning to do. He goes to the board meeting of the Foreign Correspondents Club, and they're kind of, well, what do? We have this public accusation. It doesn't involve the club. It doesn't appear to be sexual assault.
Harassment, because she didn't report to him in any way.
No. Neither woman worked with him, had any kind of work relationship. There had been no reports at the LA Times of sexual harassment by him. Prior to this accusation, the man who replaced John, because John resigned as president of the Foreign Correspondents Club that night, the man who replaced him said, until that first accusation, there'd been no rumors against John, there'd been no accusations, there'd been no accusations at the LA Times. But someone else on the board knew that this second woman was thinking about possibly making an accusation. So that came up at the meeting, and he resigned, but he was essentially forced out. He, of course, immediately reported this to the LA Times, and they looked into it. And since there was nothing involving the Times and this public accusation did not involve sexual assault, they just, what are we supposed to do? They did nothing. So that was it. And then about 4 months later, the second accuser went public.
4 months after that.
4 months, about 4 months after there.
Who now works at the
She now works at
Post.
the Washington Post. She decided to go public. She wrote a lengthy letter to the Foreign Correspondents Club, which she asked to have distributed to the several hundred members of the club. Now, this is distributing a letter to journalists. So, of course, immediately it went out further. Within it, she now said that over the course of the evening, they ran into each other at this party. He says she initiated a kiss. She does not deny this. She offered him a ride home. He got on the back of her scooter. At one point, they had to stop because they came up upon a barrier. He says they started kissing and mutually touching each other's genitals. She says he suddenly digitally penetrated her without consent. She was trying to push him off and push him off. Finally, she was able to push him off. He says, they were mutually touching each other. He says at a certain point, she said, you know what, we're out in public. We shouldn't, this is not for public. Let's stop. So he says he stops. At that point, he was within a 10-minute walk home. He said, you know what, I'm going to walk home. He says she insisted on driving him. She acknowledges she had him get back on his...
After forcing him off for this unwanted...
Correct.
She's going to give him a ride.
She gives him a ride back to his apartment where, again, she gets off the scooter and says, when they're off the scooter, he resumed his sexual assault of her and began digitally sexually assaulting her again on the street. And then she, again, pushed him away. After which, she had been to his apartment before. It was the 6th floor walk up. After that, she says she walked up 6 flights of stairs, and she said she thought, I'm going to read what she said. She said, this is from her letter, I don't remember what was going through my head as I went upstairs, whether I wanted to take a nap or get some water or maybe make out.
Oh, my God.
And as I say in the story, in other words, despite what she described as a chilling escape from Kaman only minutes earlier, she put him on the back of her scooter, took him to his door, where she claimed she was sexually violated again, and then, under her own power, hiked the many stairs to his apartment with the idea of possibly resuming consensual sexual contact.
Consensual sexual assault.
Yeah.
Well...
Oh, but maybe some New York Times, was it Laura Bennett or someone in the Times said, well, even when women consent, it's not necessarily consent.
Yeah, but following you up 6,
that's pretty.
I could also see as friends, let's say her description of the encounter on the scooter happened as she said it. And then you thought, okay, I'll give you a drive back to your apartment. I really didn't like that. I'm mad about that, but, and you drop them off, but then you clearly drive away.
If you're afraid of somebody, if someone's violated you, you want to get away. I mean, don't go. I mean, it just doesn't make sense psychologically. Now, of course, with the new rules, well, when women are traumatized, they're not responsible. Then that is completely infantilizing women and making us incapable of agency. And and I know she's protested your story and all that, but she has never explained why, after these alleged assaults, which sound more like drunken, sort of...
Well, he says it was mutual groping.
Mutual drunken groping. But despite that, she goes up to his apartment, and then they resume whatever they were doing before.
Well, they get up there. He performs oral sex on her. This is not disputed. They had intercourse. What is disputed is that she said... he didn't use a condom. He says he did use a condom. So that's disputed. In one of her protests of the story, she said later they had a conversation about sexually transmitted diseases, which she says is evidence that he didn't use a condom. He says, well, we both performed oral sex on each other, and, a condom is not 100% guarantee of not...
The fact that we're having to micro-describe these
Well, this sounds like one of these cases.
And decide or judge these.
This is what college, these sex
so
courts
much
are
of
facing.
MeToo flows from what the template that was established on college. And so they're up there.
Go on.
He performed oral sex on her. They had intercourse. The dispute is condom or no condom. And then he said, and he thought it was rather odd, she performed oral sex on him. So that part has not been disputed.
Well, she was putting, again, male pleasure ahead of her own.
Yeah.
But she says, and here in the letter, and this is a key phrase. She described all this in her letter that went out to all her colleagues and then was picked up by the AP and went out all over the world.
There's a shocker.
I am devastated by the fact that I was not more sober so that I could say with absolute certainty whether what happened that night was rape.
Oh, the word rape.
In other words, she deployed her doubt in a way that inflicted maximum damage on him because, as he says, his name is forever linked to the word rape, even though she's saying, I don't know if it was. And that went out. He was suspended by the LA Times. Not long afterward, his book was canceled. The LA Times conducted a lengthy investigation. He has never been given the results of the investigation, but he was fired. At the time he was fired, the LA Times was in the middle of a sale, and several of the executives of the current owners had been accused of sexual harassment in the workplace. So the last thing they needed was a low-level foreign correspondent who's made international news. He was fired. We don't know what the content of the report is. And that was about a year ago.
And where is he now?
He came home from China. He was planning to come home and take book leave. Of course, there's no book. There's no job to leave and no book to write.
No income.
No income.
No insurance, nothing.
No, he has no health insurance. He was acutely suicidal and has dealt for the past year with suicidal thoughts. He's had to pay out of pocket for medical help. He's had to pay, obviously, for an attorney to help him through the workplace process. His girlfriend has stood by him.
When they go too far and they're beginning to cross people, just wonderful people. And I've read about her, and seems quite brilliant and believes in him. And they've made an enemy of a formidable woman.
Well, this is a really interesting point about the whole Me Too and where does it go? Because it's not... First of all, we can't have a society of men versus women. Women have fathers and husbands and brothers and sons they love.
And boyfriends.
And boyfriends.
Even
and
boyfriends
Charlotte...
who betray you a little bit.
Well, I asked her about it, and she said, yeah, of course I was mad about that. That was a one-time thing, said, I don't think people should be tossed on a heap for a, one-time mistake, which he, was abjectly apologetic for. So she has stood by him. But I've spoken to other women in the lives of men who've been accused. And if you look at the polling, there's been a bunch of interesting polls in the past year about Me Too. And as, we're now into 2 years later, a lot of the public, male and female, Democrat and Republican, are just concerned. They are concerned about workplace harassment because, of course, Me Too exposed just absolutely shocking, horrendous abuse.
Behavior,
And also, brought attention to just the kind of low-level, debilitating harassment that used to be just the absolute norm is not the norm. There are, harassment laws against it, but which exist too many places. So bravo for that. But it has also made people worried. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to tell John Kaiman's story is that it raises these larger issues of what are the limits of this? What do we call sexual misconduct? Are there... I say in the piece, when we expand the category of victim and perpetrator to encompass anyone, no one's safe. But
if your life can be destroyed
by what
without
at the time clearly seemed to be a consensual encounter that happened many years ago, because of the work I do, and maybe you two hear from people, people find me. My email's out there, and there are people who are men getting called, workplace is getting called. Do you know you have someone on your staff who violated me 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Right.
I mean, this is happening.
Whispering campaigns all over the place against people, and
we don't know. Maybe some of them complaints
we don't know,
are
but you know what?
legitimate,
That's
but there
why
are no rules now.
But there are no rules. But there is a reason why a civilized society, why it's foundational to our society, this due process, and it's the best, not perfect, but it's the best truth-seeking apparatus, truth-finding apparatus we've ever known. Without it, you just don't know.
Well, as far as due process, and people will say, look, in these situations, the vast majority, there's no criminal charge. Due process kicks in when the government is taking an action against a citizen. And in campus sexual assault Title IX, the majority of the cases, most people attend public colleges, so due process is due because your school is a government institution. So, but I agree with you, due process is a shorthand, Christina, for, I think, what is fair process.
Yes, because it's not, this is what people have to understand. It's not just a legal concept, it's a moral concept.
Yes.
It's something that we evolved, that developed because we're concerned about protecting one another from
Well, let me
destruction
just jump in
without
for
evidence.
Sorry, let me jump in for a second. That one of the arguments for Me Too will say, well, yeah, these aren't always due process matters. I mean, that there are patterns of behavior that don't rise to the level of legality that women have tolerated for a long time, that are totally inappropriate, of whether it's sort of, certain types of banter that demean women in the workforce, that they're not taken seriously, that they get groped occasionally. So I can see that, I think, and sometimes when you ask women, well, what about this innocent guy? We're all for Harvey Weinstein getting taken down, but what about this guy? They'll go, well, if there's collateral damage, too bad. They don't see the consequences of someone like this life, but they say, well, that maybe, look, women have paid this price, their own quiet prices for a long, long time. Maybe it's just fair.
Too bad. Now men are going to have to bear the burden.
Yes.
So injustice should beget injustice. I mean, it delegitimizes the whole movement. Feminists should be for justice for everyone. I mean, just to say innocent people will be destroyed and we're okay with that, we shouldn't be okay with that. And again, as I say, when you have a case like John Kaman, you're describing the kind of not criminal, just sexual harassment at the workplace. That is not we have a body of civil law. Yeah. That's not all right. People should be held responsible for that, and there should be fair procedures within the workplace. But what was so interesting about this case and why I wanted to write about it, this case has nothing to do with the workplace. Mm-hmm. Nothing.
This was a boyfriend, girlfriend, hookup,
This was private sexual behavior. During his investigation by the LA Times, he was asked, as a young man in your early 20s, did you ever read the book The Game, which was a book about pickup artists. Pickup artists are the guys who get techniques to go pick up strange women and try to go to bed with them.
It's a dating guide for incels.
But did it even exist when he was...
Well, The Game was a huge bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for months. Many people read it. He read it. He was asked that question because someone he knew in China, he had, in some conversation... mentioned the book. He had been in China for 9 years. So the Foreign Correspondents Club had a meeting asking people to contact the LA Times with any evidence they had against John, to build a case against John. So someone contacted the LA Times and said, I heard him talk about reading this book. And so just think of what it means to be in your workplace and have your career on the line and have someone say, have you read the following book?
Oh, my goodness.
Did you read the following book 8 years ago?
At this point, I would have turned myself into the Chinese authorities because I think I would have been
Struggle
treated
session.
better. But you got in so I want to go to now your backlash because I'm looking at this printout of the Vox story that came out that attacked you for. If you read your story, and it just says you've been reading pieces of it aloud, it's a very judicious story. It really is just the facts, ma'am, sir, laying out what happened, and in in your wonderful journalistic way, you leave it to all of us to decide what we should think. But then immediately you got slammed by Vox, and the headline sort of says it all. MeToo's latest critics say they want to help the movement. Why are they shaming women? Critiques by journalist Emily Yoffe and others blame women.
Others was Jane Mayer, and they're also accusing Jane Mayer, who made a very reasonable case for Al Franken.
So how do you feel?
Not just reasonable, powerful. She did the reporting that was never done at the time.
Right.
Oh, see, this is what I just wish there were more journalists like you and Jane Mayer.
Well, how can there be? Like,
story.
how do you feel getting attacked, and what did you experience when you got attacked for this story?
Well, the headline's interesting because Jane Mayer and I are women.
This was written by a woman named Anna North.
Right. I don't think Jane and I are shaming women. We're journalists, and we each saw stories that we felt were not. There was more to the story, and we wanted to tell the story. So, I mean, the circle of women shaming, why is it all right to do reporting on a case where both Jane and I give full voice to the accusers? Jane gives full voice to the Franken accusers. I give full voice to John Kaman's two accusers who have a written account, and we give copious quotes in context of what they have to say. What none of the stories really said, and what the journalists at the Foreign Correspondents Club did not want, was John Kaman's version. So Jane and I have each done reporting and given both sides. I don't think I'm kind of astounded Vox would consider that shaming. When you have an accusation, there are two sides. One of the main critiques against me was that I spoke to John. And prior to that, he had, he issued a couple of Twitter statements and then tried to issue a statement on the second accusation saying the first one, kind of the basic facts, he agreed with, not the interpretation. The second one said there are, I have serious differences with the account that went out. So I guess I was a little surprised that just the basic recognition when you have an accusation, you need to hear both sides is you just have to.
Fundamental.
And so to attack
journalism
for that is kind of odd. I mean, the Vox story, beyond that, it was not clear to me what her
point was.
Yeah,
really.
What is it? Sometimes I think, like in these stories that you describe, what's in it for these women? Like here we are talking about she did this, like in the most graphic and intimate way. And if you have been like these women who have come and spoken out against Harvey Weinstein or Les Moonves, and they've faced horrible situations and discrimination, and it is brave of them to come out and take this stand, and there have been repercussions against women in the past for doing this.
Absolutely.
What's in it for a woman who's had this icky encounter / date? Why do they want to become public with this? Why 5 years later do you think? I mean, I guess we have to be maybe a psychiatrist, but I guess this woman got a job at the Washington Post. What do you think is going on, Emily? You used to do an advice column. What's in their heads,
Well, I know you two on many episodes have talked about this. What is going on? And I think this is a very generational divide. Kind of around 45 is where people over 45.
Speak for yourself.
People are saying, what's up with that? If you make a decision to have sex with someone and, at the end it's good, bad, or indifferent, that's your decision. Right.
And being that vindictive.
I frankly don't understand it, except, you can see there is both women got hailed as being very brave. So there's a world, the first accuser said, I want to add my voice to this movement that's going on. And at
the time she added her voice, it wasn't really that brave. It was kind of a safe thing to do because you would be, could kind of predict that you'd be surrounded by supportive voices. And whereas if you are wrongly accused, the isolation, this is what I've heard. I also hear from people who suffer this, and I never know, what to make of them, but I look at these cases. What was fascinating about the case you described is that basically what happened on those dates isn't that much in dispute, but what's in dispute is that one party just insists that it was clearly some kind of sexual violation, and the other says no. There's no way to know for sure, but yet if people, the younger generation and people that have been brought up with rape culture theory, and just from the moment you arrive in campus, you have these courses that are infused with propaganda, false information. The campus is a rape culture, and you have one in four of you will be raped or victims of sexual assault. They learn this kind of catechism of oppression, and I think that now I think we have a contagion of hysteria.
But it's also, I just would think her name, the menace of Google today, like he will never. Like if he goes to apply for a job or whatever, and he doesn't change his name, and even if he changes his name, this is going to come up as you've at least put a corrective that will come up on Google.
No, her article will come up now with his name, and I think that's a good thing. And fair-minded people,
Emily, right? But there's still
we'll see what's
her
happening.
Name is going to come up on this, and that doesn't seem to matter at the moment. But we've talked just amongst ourselves in the past about these cycles of, I guess, sort of Puritanism in American history. And we were talking about in the 90s, we remember it was very similar.
Yes.
That's when this really first kind of...
You're talking about the 80s with the panic 80s, around daycare centers?
No, I'm talking about Andrea Dworkin.
Oh, yeah.
The rise, that happened in the 90s.
Yes.
Where we first saw that, hey, a kiss is not just a kiss. It's not just
part of a continuum. It's a continuum.
But at the time, and there was a lot of hysteria. There was a lot of discussion about boys being worried about going out with girls and these types of accusations and redefinitions of assault to be these kinds of stories. But then it kind of passed.
Yes.
And now it's kind of risen up like...
It got tenure. It never went away. We thought it passed. It passed because we won the argument. And if you go back and look at even the Antioch colleges where they first had this idea that it wasn't, it was a kind of violation unless you had explicit consent, and
for every
stage of the
touch.
Yeah, and everybody laughed at that, including the New York Times and New York.
Saturday Night Live did a mocking sketch about that rule. That rule is now called affirmative consent.
Yes.
And
what was the sketch? I forgot.
It was this joking sketch of someone asking for, each button being, can I unbutton button number one, number two, okay.
And you get,
that is affirmative consent is now the rule.
Yeah.
I would say on most campuses in the country, certainly all the elite institutions, it is the law regarding campuses in New York, California, and Connecticut. So every institution of higher education in those states has affirmative consent. And the American Bar Association this summer, this was not covered by the mainstream media, almost passed a model piece of criminal legislation that they are saying to state legislators, here's a model of a law you should have on your books, which would make affirmative consent a criminal statute. This is jail lifetime. This is prison.
This is carceral feminism.
Carceral feminism, and it almost passed because no one was paying attention, and then the National Criminal Defense lawyers realized what was happening. So it did not pass the American Bar Association, but
it came close.
It came close. So the ideas that were mocked are now absolutely mainstream, and if you are inculcated with that on campus, of course it is spilling over beyond the campus.
But there's also the other difference between the 90s and now, of course, is social media. And so much of this is happening through Twitter. I mean, this is how this story took place. You have editors and managers, executives who are petrified.
Yes.
And suddenly they're inundated. And you know that Twitter is very, it's distorted because you can, I thought about that once. You'll write something and you'll get a lot of likes, and 100 people like that. And then I thought, 100 people, like 100, like a
big country.
It's right.
350 million.
50 million people. Okay, maybe it's not a big deal.
You go, girl.
But if you got 100 angry messages,
oh my God.
Well, no, but it's also
you would think that was a big deal. People don't believe Twitter.
We also have this. Well, you talk about, not ignoring female or infantilizing, as you put it, female sexual agency. But look, that guy's boss can say, I've looked at the evidence. I'm sorry. This, you can mob me all you like. It's going to pass. We know these things pass until the mob moves on to the next one.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
Why don't...
Why are people so afraid?
Yeah.
Here's 2 words, Aaron Persky.
Oh, yes.
Yes, good point. Explain that one. Yeah.
Okay. Aaron Persky was the judge in the Brock Turner case, the Stanford swimmer who was convicted of sexual assault. Everyone says rape. His conviction was sexual assault against a passed out young woman. Aaron Persky imposed a short sentence,
6
jail
months,
sentence.
which allowed him to get out at 3 months. Yeah.
Recommended by the prosecutor.
Recommended by the probation, female probation officer.
Probation.
Brock Turner also has a lifetime sex offender. He's a lifetime sex offender on the registry, which means your life is more or less
You can live under a bridge.
ruined.
Yeah.
So Persky became the target of a national campaign. He was recalled from being a judge, and
which was the first time, I think, in 80 years in California.
It's almost never happened. There was a campaign to unseat Aaron Persky for this completely within the guideline decision.
Yep.
He was unseated, and just recently, he was a judge. He just got hired by a high school to coach the girls' tennis team. He's the highly ranked tennis player. He was going to be a high school tennis coach. That got out, and the school fired him because of this fairly light sentence he had imposed on Brock Turner. And I've been reading comments about the coverage of this, and people are saying, how can you have such a person around young women? As if Aaron Persky himself did anything. So that's why people are terrified.
Well, there are 2 points that come from that as well, because he got fired 2 days after it was reported that he'd done this, because the mob picked up their Twitter pitchforks and followed him there. He was then fired.
And so, yes, that school district should have stood up. But if you are looking out...
But let's say you're in the school district.
But also female jurists wrote, and jurists, because the other effect of this was scaring, like a judicial freeze. Because if judges are subject to this kind of social media shaming and pressure, you will be afraid, like these bosses. You will be afraid to impose what are, under any
more reasonable sentences.
So more young men, in this case, are going to go to prison and have longer sentences.
Absolutely.
And it's already happening. I've already seen people.
If you're a judge, you don't get in trouble for a too lengthy sentence.
No.
You get in trouble for a too light sentence. So I would bet the same women who are cheering Judge Aaron Persky's removal from the bench, would say, mass incarceration has been an abomination.
Yes, exactly.
We have got to roll this back. We have got to shorten sentences. We overpunish, which we do, except we will carve out a new area where we want to put as many people in prison for a long time as possible.
Can we put this now in the context of the larger Me Too movement? What do you sort of see happening now? Do you see any change in public attitude? You talked about people getting upset in the polls.
I think people feel silenced and unable to say, of course they want bad behavior stopped and the perpetrators of it dealt with appropriately. But the answer to that is not to expand the parameters. There are no rules now. There are no statute of limitations. And, we saw with Kirsten Gillibrand when she was calling for Al Franken's resignation from the Senate, said, of course, what he is accused of doing, which is touching people during, getting photos with them, which he disputes, is nothing like what Harvey is accused of. But she said, if he did grope people, that's not okay. Let's put aside whether or not he did. Of course, groping's not okay, but she was saying we can't, make distinctions. Life is based on making distinctions.
Our legal system, our moral system is based on degrees of guilt and proportion, of harm. If we don't have that, we have nothing.
And we can't. What I think is unsustainable about Me Too, and of course there are people who've been accused, who've been investigated and cleared at their workplace. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the scientist, had
Junot Diaz.
Three separate investigations. Junot Diaz had 3 separate investigations, and they were both returned. Now you have this lifetime mark against you. But not everyone has been cast out. But the danger is of this kind of imposition of a civil life sentence. And people say, well, they're not in prison, so what? Mm-hmm. To lose your career forever, to be unable to be an economic actor or even have friends, that's quite a big deal.
It's like leper colony.
And one of the central points of Me Too was the harm people like Les Moonves of CBS and Harvey Weinstein did to women who were coming in to talk, about being professionals and working for them, and then get attacked and harassed and then threatened if they dare speak out. One of the central things Me Too talked about is the harm to women's careers if you literally are not safe at the workplace. So it recognized careers are very important. And, women's advancement has been harmed by this. Well, you can't just say, all right, well, whether or not it's fair or not, a guy's career ends, that's okay. No, it's not okay if it's not fair.
Well, one of the things I was talking with my 17-year-old daughter the other night, we were sort of talking about this case, a bunch of stuff, and you realize she was dealing with some mansplaining in her government club at school, and how did she deal with this as she's getting this condescension, and it was so familiar, right? And there are, what I loved about the original discussion that Me Too opened was these gradations of behavior in the workplace, that recognizing that, coming up and condescending and excluding and
silencing
and not respecting the traits and values that women bring to an office, sort of, the old boys club, et cetera, that for a while was a really, really good conversation. And there were a lot of really, really good men saying, you know what, maybe, I'm looking, it's the way we now look at some old movies and go, whoa, that's so, that would never happen today. Like there was that kind of reckoning, which did seem very healthy and productive. And now what I fear is as we expand, as you say, the parameters, it's really going to redound on women again,
I am very concerned about young women's advancement. Lean In, the Sheryl Sandberg organization, has done back-to-back polls, one the first year after Me Too and one this year, asking male managers, have you changed your behavior at all vis-a-vis Me Too? Well, one thing that the first year, about 45% of male managers said, I try to avoid ever being alone with a woman, particularly a younger woman at work. I'm concerned about that, or concerned about, I don't want to engage in social events or chit-chat with them. This year, the poll showed that's 60%. And I'm sure you're all hearing anecdotally, I'm hearing anecdotally, such things as, and I've heard this from a lot of people, because I asked people, in the corporate workplace, someone told me that this male manager in his 40s, married with kids, had to go on a sales trip with a single 29-year-old female colleague. So they arrive, they get to the car rental place, and he's booked the logistics. They get into separate cars and go to separate hotels.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
group rates there.
So obviously, then what you would do is, normally you'd go with your colleague, and then you'd have dinner, and then you go to the work thing, and at the end of the day, you have drinks and talk over what happened. And guys are saying,
not happening.
Work only. You interact in a work setting only. No drinks, no dinner, no riding up in the elevator with anyone. And so this, now there are articles being written about this, and men are doing this kind of sub rosa. I know someone, an editor at a top paper, who said when the summer interns came in over the course of summer, I would go to lunch with each one of them separately so you can talk to them. And this male editor said, I would never go to a lunch with a female intern. Mm-hmm. Never. So I don't go to lunch with any of them.
Now, what would
I
you
don't
say?
go to lunch with any of them.
So I've heard some feminist columnists say, well, you can go to lunch with them, just don't harass them.
Right.
Well, look,
and what's your answer to that?
Yeah, Mike Pence is maybe a feminist pioneer.
Yeah.
All the mocking that he got.
I know. This is so bad. And I have read that over and over. Just don't be a giant jerk. And they don't always use the word jerk. Yeah. That solves the problem. No, it doesn't. If
you have a psycho accuser, like those who denounced
Glenn Close, tell me of your talents.
Because I've heard of cases where the guy says, hey, let's have drinks, and you get reported because is he trying to groom me, or what is he trying? Because the young women have been told everyone's a potential Harvey.
Yeah.
Right.
So don't be a jerk.
So it's so
debilitating.
It's debilitating. It's reactionary.
And Sheryl Sandberg herself said, and a lot of people are saying, why should you have drinks together? You shouldn't have drinks together. You shouldn't meet one-on-one. Sheryl Sandberg herself, at the end of this latest poll, said, this is very alarming. Obviously, in her career, all the men who, she
mentored her and helped
her. You spend the time. That's how you get to know each other and trust each other. And if
become
trust
friends,
is gone,
become friends,
right.
And then everything you learn from them and they help you.
Right.
And this is becoming dangerous. So this is very, very bad and a real setback.
And it needs to be talked about, and not just in a way of
a snarky,
yeah,
right. If you just
that's why we have the femsplainers.
Yes, we're here.
We've kept Emily very, very long, but wonderfully, like always, a fascinating conversation. We hope you'll, of course, come back. We're for those of you who are Patreon subscribers, you will get to hear Emily, on our monthly special episode, answer a very racy question that one of our patrons sent in. But
nobody else gets to hear it.
Nobody else gets to hear it unless you subscribe now to Patreon.
And it's like the best part of the podcast.
If you like what you're hearing, just like $1 a month,
support us.
Please.
Help us. Otherwise, we'll be silenced.
Patreon.com/femsplainers. But Emily, thank you for staying with us. And I think we've gone on so long on this episode that we'll have to bump listener reaction, etc., to next week.
No, people are willing to hear more. I'm willing to hear more.
but we're certainly going to hear more from Emily in a moment. But anyway, Emily, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
So delightful to be here. Thank you.
Emily was Awesome, as always. Emily, we have to have her on as many times as she will let us have
But
her
why
on.
aren't there? Look, she's exceptional and she's brilliant and all of that, and just a great reporter. And she was like the most popular writer at Slate ever.
Right. Slate
And
being
now-
a liberal publication.
And now at the Atlantic, and she's fantastic. But I ask this just simply out of curiosity: why aren't there more Emilys out there? There is brilliant women.
Because you see what happened, and we talked about it. What happened to Emily?
No, but there are brave women. Women are brave. Are you saying women aren't brave?
No, but I'm saying I think humanity is not brave.
Yeah,
and I think there are a lot of
humanity
people who don't
lets
want to
us
go
down.
through just even...
Who wants to go there?
Who wants to get mauled on Twitter?
Well, Jane Mayer came through in that article about Al Franken, and she took a lot of abuse.
Right, but I think she doesn't really want to talk. Like, she wants to move on to her next story. It's like
the professors. I often ask, like, why weren't there more professors like me? When I first looked at like feminist theory, it was most of it was nonsensical, and it was obvious to me that it wouldn't withstand, a scrutiny from even a minimally reasonable person. But other feminists, like me, didn't come forward. Scholars didn't come forward.
Well,
and it flourished.
Right.
And it's just a warning that if people don't come forward and cry foul in the face of nonsense.
Well, it's also like, I don't want to be on the all things lead to Hitler, and you know who else didn't speak out?
No, we're not going to do the argument about Hitler.
The irony of this young man named Kaman being in China, and where there really is a truly silencing and jailing culture, and
we have a silencing and
this is happening
annihilating
around,
culture.
but it's happening around the world, and that's what is nerve-wracking. Is, as Emily said, that you have to meet injustice with injustice. Sorry. I almost said that completely backwards.
She's had too much of whatever she's drinking.
My La Croix water.
Yeah.
Overdose.
I get drunk on La Croix.
I know. It's great stuff, but not a sponsor, by the way. Could be. No, I mean, you need your movement has to put justice at the forefront of it. And if you're willing to put up with injustice in seeking justice,
you end up with, we won't say it, but like the show trials and punishing because innocent people.
And next, like women who cut off their husbands,
please,
are going to be heroines and put on posters.
They made a heroine. Some people made a heroine of the original
Lorena Bobbitt.
Yeah.
No, was she a feminist heroine?
Yes, I remember it clearly. I think it's in my first book on what was my first book?
Who Stole Feminism?
Who Stole Feminism? There was like a Lorena Bobbitt club in Virginia, and the Now chapter.
That's true, and she threw it by the roadside. But
they put it back on.
Yes,
they got
time.
They got back together.
Hours.
They got back together.
No,
I think they did.
Maybe he's kinky. Maybe he liked it.
Yeah. Well, never mind.
All right.
On. We should
We gotta go. We gotta go. But thank you, everyone, for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Keep up with us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. Send questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com.
A big thanks to Ella Ryder, our research and in-studio production assistant, and to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor. And we're proud to be part of the Ricochet Network and grateful to the American Enterprise Institute for allowing us to record in its studio every week in downtown Washington, D.C.
And miss something? You'll find everything you need at our homepage, femsplainers.com, including links to past episodes, our sponsors, where you can sign up to support us, and even to merch. And please don't forget to like us or give us 5 stars on iTunes.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.